Good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to this workshop on AI, productivity, and informality in Latin America. Great pleasure to welcome you all of you who have made the time to join us today. I just thought that in addition to welcoming you, I would make a couple of points, share a couple of thoughts with you on why we think this is an important topic to be discussed in the context of Latin America. I think we all agree that AI is no longer just a topic of interest for specialists. It's also becoming a very crucial issue for policymakers, for businesses, for workers around the world. Much of the debate so far has focused on the opportunities and risks that AI may bring, but the fundamental question could also be thought of as one of whether or not this can be a new technology that can help raise productivity and improve living standards in our countries. This question is particularly important in the context of Latin America, a region that has made a lot of progress in strengthening macroeconomic stability over the past few decades. But one challenge remains across that part of the world, which is the issue of weak productivity growth. There are sizable gaps in terms of productivity relative to OECD countries for the average of the region, but also across firms, across sectors, and between formal and informal sectors of the economy. That's why raising productivity is so important if the region wants to create stronger growth, better jobs, and improve living standards. That's one of the reasons, obviously, why AI has generated so much interest in Latin America as it has in other parts of the world as well. There is an expectation that AI could be part of the solution to this challenge of weak productivity growth by helping firms make better decisions, improve access to information and knowledge by both businesses and workers, and allow workers to perform tasks that previously required much higher levels of expertise. So in principle, one could say that these technologies could help narrow some of the long-standing productivity gaps that the region has been grappling with. But at the same time, experience suggests that technology alone is rarely enough. One can argue that for AI to deliver the benefits that we expected to deliver, there are complementary investments that need to be made in skills and training for the workforce, in the development and access to digital infrastructure, managerial capabilities on the part of businesses, and institutions that could support innovation and diffusion. In other words, the challenge is not only to develop or improve access to new technologies, but also make sure that they spread throughout the economy and benefit most businesses and segments of the population. That's why the issue is so important for Latin America, where informality remains widespread and differences in capabilities of firms are often also very large. AI could become a powerful tool for productivity diffusion and at the same time more inclusive growth. But there is also a risk that the benefits are concentrated among a relatively narrow group of firms and workers, reinforcing existing divides rather than narrowing them. So this is the background in which we are going to be exchanging over the next 90 minutes or so. The question that is under consideration is what conditions need to be in place for AI to help Latin America close its productivity gap and broaden economic opportunities across the region. We'll bring together to the debate today the perspective of the OECD, the Inter-American Development Bank, but also partners in government, in academia, and in the private sector. We hope that you will find these exchanges today useful in your own work. If you are in policy, hope that we will be able to inform some of the decisions that countries in the region will have to make. So thank you very much for joining us today. I look forward to the exchanges. And with that, Phyllis, I give the floor to you.
Thanks a lot, Luis. Welcome, everybody. It's very nice to be here this morning, this afternoon with you. We will have two parts of the presentations, and then at the end, we will move to the roundtable discussion. So first, the first part of the discussion on this topic will be covering artificial intelligence in the context of productivity and firms. What do we know about AI adoption and its impact on productivity? We will have two complementing presentations. One is from Peter Gell from the OECD Economics Department, and then Rodrigo Zran from CENIA will be presenting their findings, particularly focusing on the region. So without any further ado, I will leave the floor to Peter. Just to let you know that after our presenters make their cases, we will have at the end time for discussion. So I will please ask you to note your questions for the discussion. Thank you so much. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Phyllis. I started to share the screen. I hope you all see it well. Great. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the organizers for inviting us and to be able to discuss our work that focuses on the macroeconomic effects of AI across the globe. This is joined with our team and our colleagues, and also with some collaboration with the Harvard Growth Lab economist Mohammed. So the way we approach the question is to look at it from the micro to macro path. There's a lot of evidence now at the micro level in various tasks that AI can help boost productivity, can help workers to complete their tasks in a faster and better way. But the question is how much this translates to macroeconomic productivity effects. And this is not obvious and not trivial because these tasks are not covering all segments of the economy. So there is a sectoral dimension to this, and some sectors are more exposed to AI than others. The other uncertainty is, of course, to what extent AI will be used in the economy currently and in the future. The exercise we're trying to look at is a medium-term effect, a 10-year effect, a 10-year horizon effect from AI. This is helpful because it will if you look at the not too short horizon where you have a lot of adjustment costs in the short run to use AI, we're looking through that, and we're focusing on the potential effects in when these adjustment costs are already gone, and the 10-year horizon seems like an ideal one. It's also not too long that you don't need to take into account too speculative outcomes related to integration with robotics or boosting innovation in a permanent manner, which would of course lead to larger gains accumulated over a very long run. So we chose this 10-year horizon, which is something that the literature has been doing, primarily started by Daron Acemoglu's work, but then also picked up by Philippe Aghion, so two Nobel Prize winners looked at the issue, and we adopt basically their framework to a sectoral setting. And we also embed this sectoral setting into a global production network model. This is thanks to the contribution from the Harvard Growth Lab, which mapped their global model with the OECD input-output linkages to have a rich representation of the world economy in 76 countries and 45 sectors. And we also test the role of knowledge spillovers in driving AI gains differentially across countries. And then beyond projecting country-level estimates from AI, we're also trying to understand the sources of those gains in terms of the domestic contribution and the foreign contribution, and to what extent it's driven by the import and the export type channels, and how the allocation of market shares can affect this. So the first component, and as I mentioned, is a micro-level component, is the task-level gains from AI in a variety of settings. There has been a series of very well-done experimental studies at the firm, I should say, worker level, comparing those people who have access to AI and those who don't have access to AI. And these are identifying very precisely estimated effects. The first one here, just to tell you an example, this has now been published in the Quarterly Journal of Economics. It looks at customer service agents who have access to generative AI models, how much faster they can complete their task and how much better. So this is a 17% increase immediately after they start to use it. And over time, they can have some learning effects on top of it. When we move on to another task, it's coding, that's where a lot of discussions happening nowadays, because that's where AI actually developed a lot, even on top of the already estimated quite significant gains, which are 50% faster completion of coding tasks. And these latest agentic AI models are probably even faster, but the literature has a hard time keeping up with all the advances in the technology. So these studies have been done in 1 or 2 years ago capabilities, and they already showed between 20 and 50% increase in the productivity at the task level. So for a conservative approach, we took a 30% baseline assumption, which was the average of the 4 most precisely estimated effects at that time. The second component is, as I mentioned, these are tasks that are done by generative AI. They cover mostly knowledge-intensive services, cognitive activities. They do not impact so much yet the physical, manual-intensive activities such as agriculture, fishing, construction, and lots of manufacturing activities. There, AI is mostly having impact in back office or front office applications, let's say keeping logistic systems in shape or in marketing and so on. So that's why the exposure variable, which is the share of activities in a sector that can be done by or can be helped by AI, is pretty low in these sectors. These estimates are actually coming from a science publication that was done joined by AI lab people and academics from UPenn, and they evaluated AI's capabilities under 2 scenarios: a baseline version and an expanded capability, which by now is probably the baseline capability, because at the time when they did it 2 years ago, the expanded capabilities were covering areas such as when AI has access to an internet, and now it's a baseline setup basically. And because these activities weights vary across countries to a large degree, this will also shape the aggregate effects of AI. So on the most advanced part of the distribution, you have United Kingdom and US, which have a large segment of their economy concentrated in knowledge-intensive services where AI is particularly highly exposed, such as telecom, finance, ICT services, and professional services, and so on. And then in economies where you have a larger weight of manufacturing, such as Italy and Germany, the impacts tend to be lower because of this composition effect. The third component, which is the most forward-looking one, and that's where perhaps solid policies have the most lever to work on, is the diffusion or adoption, the take-up of the technology by firms. And here, the approach we took was to compare AI with the adoption path of previous general-purpose technologies, such as electricity or computers and the internet. And we plotted here on this chart the share of firms using these technologies from time 0, which is the user-friendly introduction of the technology. In AI, it's the ChatGPT kind of era in 2022. Electricity, it was the electric motor, and then for computers, it was the personal computer. For internet, it's the World Wide Web. So starting from that initial user-friendly variant of the technology, over time, how the technology take-up has evolved. This chart is showing that, and then we overlay on top of it what we see in AI from the past 3 years of statistics. And from this, we're going to define 3 main scenarios. One is a slow adoption scenario, which follows the path of electricity. The medium one is internet and PCs, the previous digital technologies. And a faster one, which we chose to calibrate somehow this rapid speed of adoption that we see for AI. And given their user-friendly nature of AI, perhaps more user-friendly than the computers and internet were, we chose mobile phones as an additional scenario where we had comparable data. And based on these scenarios, you have different take-up increases over the next 10 years from AI, ranging from 23 percentage point additional use by firms to 60 percentage points. And this, we calibrated for the United States, these 3 scenarios, but then we map the initial adoption rates to current observed adoption rates across countries where it's possible. Where it's not possible because data is not comparable, we had to do some imputations and predictions based on digital infrastructure or skills. And we try to enrich this even further by running a new survey globally across countries to have more comparable data on AI use currently. And the result of combining the micro gains, the exposure, and the future scenarios for adoption leads us into the macro picture, which we then, the sectoral effects, we were feeding them into this global model that also takes into account trade linkages. So these effects that we are getting here, they also incorporate the indirect channels between trading economies, those who are using AI less domestically, but they trade a lot with countries that use AI a lot. So what are these spillover effects that you can have from there? This is also incorporated here. The main finding I want to highlight here is that indeed those countries where you have more knowledge-intensive services and faster initial adoption observed now, United States, and then Sweden and Switzerland and Ireland in Europe. Also, you have Korea there outside Europe. So these countries are the ones that are likely to benefit most over this 10-year horizon because of their sectoral structure, because of their rapid take-up and supported by good digital infrastructure and skills. On the other hand of the spectrum are a lot of Latin American countries and also Eastern European countries where digital infrastructure and skills are less developed, leading to lower adoption currently, and also the sectoral structure is less amenable to large gains. And we try to understand the drivers of these aggregate gains in terms of the domestic and the foreign components. So we did a lot of the decomposition that spits out these effects into domestic and foreign contributions. And the foreign contributions correlate very strongly with the exposure of economies to imports. And we see that in these more advanced AI adopter countries, this amounts to around 20% of the gains that they have from AI. It's basically the channel that occurs to your country, because you're trading with countries that use AI themselves, and they will sell products and services in a cheaper way, and that benefits your economy. So this contributes around 20% of the gains. This is in the medium scenario, by the way, medium speed scenario. And in the economies that themselves do not adopt a lot of AI, but they trade with economies that are themselves heavy adopters, and here I'm thinking of the Latin American Caribbean region, which have a lot of exposure to trade with the United States, who is a heavy AI adopter, but themselves don't adopt so much. They have a contribution from this trade channel, which is quite substantial compared to their total gains. It's 50% or even larger through this foreign contribution channel. And on top of this foreign contribution channel, you also have potential spillovers through trading with countries that use AI themselves, which might induce your firms as well to adopt the technology to a larger extent. This can be done through learning effects or through supplier linkages and so on. And we try to calibrate the size of the effects, how big they are expected to be, through these knowledge spillovers. And when to try to calibrate it to technologies that we observed in the past, there are several papers that did this in the trade literature. Some of them focused on patents. This was the most comparable that we saw. And then we get the red spillovers, which are not terribly high. And then we developed another spillover scenario, which assumes a stronger spillover that identifies from the difference between European countries who are strongly exposed to a region that has AI users in Western Europe, and also tries to match that increase in knowledge spillovers to the ones that we see in Latin America, who are also exposed to the United States, which is a strong AI adopter. But the result that we get here is that the strength of the spillover, when you want to calibrate it to such a degree that also Latin American countries benefit from it because they're close to the United States, the strength of the spillover in that scenario is 6 times as strong as the strength of spillover that you found in previous technologies. So in order to expect a lot of gains from the spillover scenarios, you need to assume a much stronger relationship in this channel that you saw than compared to what you saw in the past technologies. So this is cautionary tale to rely on the knowledge spillover channel. And basically, the conclusion that we had from this work was that the domestic adoption channel is something that you probably cannot avoid. This is where you need to invest the most attention, because the trade is nice to have and it's very important and it's indispensable in a way. But on top of it, you need to have also the domestic adoption capacity sufficiently high. And that has the usual components as with other digital technologies related to skills, building trust in adoption. That's something maybe special to AI. Also enabling good quality digital infrastructure, and to scale up the benefits across the economy, you need to allow for a smooth reallocation of labor and capital to firms and to sectors where AI benefits most. And the international dimension that comes on top of it gives us the lesson that yes, trade may help spreading gains through imports, but on the other hand, and this is something I didn't have time to delve into now, but we also see another channel that those countries that themselves do not adopt fast enough, they can lose on a competitiveness channel in world markets. So if you are specialized in a sector that can benefit a lot from AI, but you fail to adopt AI fast enough, but your competitors do, then this can have a detrimental effect to you in a global environment where you can lose market share and global markets. And then the last element here is something that we assumed throughout the analysis, that basically all countries have access to the same high quality AI models and technology. It's only a matter of using them domestically that we had to focus on. But this assumption needs to be watched carefully, because there's discussions around restricting access to leading AI models by the leading developer economies such as the United States and China. So this going forward, even the gains that we predicted, which are somewhat uneven, especially in terms of the LAC region and the advanced part of the OECD, even those assume that you have access in principle to these leading models. And if that access is brought into question, then the differences can be even larger. So that calls for important collaboration internationally to ensure that digital services trade in AI models continues to exist and flourish. Thank you very much. I stop.
Thank you, Peter. This was great. Now we will quickly move to Rodrigo's presentation on productivity and AI in the Latin American countries. Rodrigo, the floor is yours.
Thanks a lot. Give me 1 second to share my screen. And thanks, Peter. It was a very, very interesting presentation. I just want to point something that, from my point of view, it's very important to have in mind, is that the paper of Elondu of 2024 only goes on GPTs and large language models. It's not AI as a whole. So the whole impact, and that's important, for example, for Latin American countries, because on mining or agriculture or oil and gas or something like that, other kind of AI, such as recommendation models or computer vision, may have a higher impact on productivity. I just wanted to make that point, to not be confused about the potential impact of the technology. But I'm going strictly to using the same literature as a baseline. So I will tell about Xenia, then about some programs that we have developed in Latin America and Caribbean to foster adoption. So what Xenia is a non-profit corporation founded by 4 universities, Católica, Chile, Adolfo Ibáñez, and Santa Maria, in 2022. And we put AI at service of the people based on 6 different action lines: research, outreach, talent development, design, development, and deployment of AI solutions, scaling and evaluation of programs, and what we are doing on society and enterprises and public sector. So I just wanted to highlight this. As Peter shown very clearly, most of evidence shows a significant impact of Gen AI in productivity in a micro level. So there's not a lot of evidence that shows that the impact is low. I completely agree with this 30% of impact of Gen AI, like as a mean. So we don't have any reason or evidence to believe that at the same levels of adoption in Latin America and Caribbean, you would have a different impact. So based on that, we think, and we are sure that AI has an impact on productivity when it's adopted. So how we can foster and promote adoption was the question that we tried to answer. So our first approach was this experiment with the IDB group. It was called Querencia. It's a training program aimed at closing the AI adoption gap and developing with leaders with theoretical and practical skills to drive a digital transformation. So what we have made was to invent 2 kinds of pathways of upskilling. The first one was something not basic, but more general about AI, based on some Stanford and MIT courses of Gen AI for decision makers. So it was kind of agnostic of the business. And the other was an upskilling program designed to foster adoption between AI leadership or business leadership. So we had 2 groups, control and treatment. And we offered, the control group has around 98 firms, the treatment group 97 firms, and we put this treatment for them around 10 weeks long. So the results after the follow-up, that means 18 months after the finishing of the course, are very, very clear. So the increase in AI understanding was 5 times higher in the treatment group than in the control group. The increase in AI comfort was 1.8 times higher in treatment group than in control group. And the increase in AI adoption was significantly higher in the treatment group, except for natural language processes technologies. That has a lot to do with the hype that chatbots and agents had in 2025. So we made this treatment on 2024, and we have found this. And because of this evidence, we have exported this to Costa Rica, Colombia, Panama, and making a second version actually here in Chile without this approach of experimental research, much more as a treatment for everyone to foster innovation. So the lesson here was when leaders and managers are trained in strategic adoption of AI instead of basics of AI or basics on machine learning or something that has not to do with the business, there's a significant difference in the organization's adoption levels. And that's very important because what we have measured are levels of adoption inside the firms, not in the people who was trained. So after that, or between that, we made this study, Generative Artificial Intelligence Opportunities in the Future of Work in Chile, with the team of Eric Björnfolson and Daniel Rock in Work Helix and in Stanford University. The Professor Gabriel Weintraub helped us in developing this study from Stanford to here. And what we have find, it's very interesting. We took the 100 most common jobs in Chile, which represent 62% of the national workforce, and analyzed every task. There were around 2,400 tasks in general to identify when Gen AI has the potential to accelerate performance. Acceleration is, as the paper said, making the same or better in the half of the time of less. And the key findings were 80% of workers are enrolled with significant exposure to Gen AI. That means more than 30% of their tasks being accelerated. 48 of the tasks in each job can be accelerated, and the potential value of this acceleration for their entire economy is almost 12% of GDP. That means $44,000 million yearly. So this is a graph that shows each dot is one occupation. The size of the dot shows the number of people in that occupation, and the vertical axis is the AI value as assumed, and the horizontal axis is the acceleration index that goes from 0 to 1. So that means that 0, it's no task may be accelerated. 1 means that all the tasks can be accelerated. In mean, one job has around 24 tasks. So that between 24 and 32, that's the mean of tasks in each occupation. And we have scaled this assessment to the rest of Latin American Caribbean. We have just finished the review with the same team, Stanford professors and Work Helix for Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, and Uruguay. And it was very, very interesting to find out the differences between what we have found here in Chile and what's happening outside Chile. So, for example, if you can see, Argentina is leader. 62% of the jobs have medium or high exposure to Gen AI. In contrast with Mexico and Colombia that have a higher relative concentration of occupations with less exposure. And that has a lot to do with the economic structure, specifically on Mexico, but I want to go deeper on that. When you see what's happening in Mexico, you see that, as we have seen before, most of the people is concentrated in this corner where you have a lot of works and occupations that are not especially exposed to Gen AI, but are very exposed to classic AI, like, for example, robotics or computer vision so it's very important to understand that this is only one part of AI adoption, and it has a lot to do with personal productivity on office, to say something. And also another stuff that it's important to understand is that, for example, the difference between Querétaro, Puebla, and Ciudad de Mexico are huge in the case of Mexico. This difference in different regional contexts are not so frequent in Chile or Uruguay or Colombia or Argentina. And that's because Mexico has a bigger economy in that way. But something that was very interesting too is that the main 5 occupations with acceleration potential are almost the same that we have found in Chile, and that's because the structure of these occupations, it's very similar what you have found. So when you see, sorry, because of the translation, I could not translate the graph here, but here are 2 highlights. The first one is that the epicenter of the potential impact is in financial services, professional services, and public administration. That's the same in all the countries: Colombia, Uruguay, Argentina, Chile, and Mexico. And the highest acceleration potential is based there. And the big mass is in retail and manufacturing. Even a small fraction of acceleration translates to hundreds of thousands of potential workers to train. And that's very important to understand. So as these sectors are so massive, little efforts can have a huge impact on productivity in that way. Something that wasn't very intuitive and was the same, this shows Mexico, but happens in all the countries, is that Gen AI strikes upwards. That means that the higher the acceleration score, the higher the average income is. So the trend, it's upward. Higher income, it's at the right side. So it's a cluster that has high exposure to Gen AI acceleration. But the cloud is very wide. So at the same score, incomes vary widely. The relationship holds true on the average, but it is not deterministic. So you cannot stand a deterministic conclusion, and it gets flatter in the top. So you start with a very wide cloud, but at the top, this become more flatter and that way deterministic. So what we have found is that this paradigm shift from jobs to tasks applies very useful for understanding the phenomena here in Latin America and Caribbean. The impact is not on the job, it's on the task. And that has a lot to do with this perspective that GPTs are actually general purpose technologies. The analysis must be conducted at task level. And that's very important because of what I will show you after that. The task technology unit allows to understand the necessary skills. So where you have to put your attention is not on the technology or the task, is the skill that habilitates a worker to use the technology for a certain task. And that was what inspired us to make this program as Logonia. So it's a public-private partnership that it's free, focused on developing concrete task-oriented AI skills. And that's very important because it's agnostic. So we don't train them to use a certain specific LLM or a specific solution, but instead to have critical thinking and all the stuff. I will show a bit of that later. The focus on productivity growth, accelerating and automatic through practical AI use cases. This is not a theoretical course. It has a lot of hands-on, and well, it's an effort of collaboration between a lot of ministries, 3 ministries: economy, labor, and science here in Chile, with the support of Google.org, SOFOFA, and of course, us as SED. We have 3 specific audiences: public servants, small and medium businesses, and teachers. That has to do with the potential acceleration index and the volume of these audiences that I have shown you because of the previous research. And today, as Logonia has around 105 150,000 people who is learning in the platform with very good numbers of engagement compared with another free LMS platforms that you can show and find here. We have a lot of partners that are working with us in this, and this is something that I wanted to showcase. It's a very, very cost-effective program. So because it has marginal decreasing cost from the design. So if you have, I don't know, 10,000 people learning through Asloconia, it's very expensive, but after the barrier of 100,000, it has get completely profitable. It's free, but profitable from a social perspective. So it's $8 per active user, $11 per approved test, and something that we have found very interesting is $3 per additional point in standardized test. That it's the final part of my presentation, assuming that, as I have said in the beginning, AI foster personal productivity. What we were pursuing is that people use more AI and understands better AI so they can get these productivity gains. So we have measured the results through two specific tools. One was designed by us, the other is the GLAD tool published by Jean in January this year. And in both tools, we see significant impact that comes from the upskilling program, 2 points in the case of the own design tool and 4 points in the case of the GLAD tool. And this is very, very interesting. There is no statistically significant evidence of differences in variables such as gender or educational previous level or region or age. So you don't find that this kind of training makes differences between audiences, and that was very, very important for us from the very beginning. So this is how the platform looks, and so it's very easy. We took a very a gamification approach at the beginning, so they show what are the challenges. Based on the challenges, we make a profile. So in one small and medium business company, you can have 11 different courses for 11 different roles inside the company, because it makes a personal route of learning for each interest and what they have learned before and what are the tasks that they are doing actually in the job. So, and well, we have launched this with public servants and also with small and medium business, and this is with my final slide that has 4 pillars of an innovative methodology. The first one is contextualization. So every learning experience is connected to specific labor market realities and also to specific activities inside that labor market reality. Task-based upskilling, that means that a granular focus on the activity that truly matters for the worker is what makes this attractive compared with other options. We have cross-sector collaboration to amplify and reach impact. And as I have said before, this personalized route that the learning tailored to each individual's levels and needs on a certain context. It's very useful also to have the level of engagement that we have reached before. So thanks a lot for your attention, and be happy to share if you have some questions.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo. So this is great to show us what's going on in the field and to learn a bit more about adoption in Latin America. I would like to open the floor for questions. Please raise your hands if you have, and unmute yourself. Maybe while people are thinking of their own questions, I can raise one. Maybe Peter, so you as you saw in Rodrigo's presentation, adoption could also be endogenous to what's happening in the economy. How do you reflect this type of thinking in our work? And maybe you can give us a little bit of thinking on where we think emerging markets and developing economies are settling in the AI adoption and more broadly use of AI for productivity enhancing technologies and work.
Yeah, no, thanks for this, and thanks also to Rodrigo. And it's great you also use these exposure measures, and I can also react to the point you raised there. It's true that yes, the alone do focus on Gen AI. We try to cross-correlate it across sectors with other exposures. The correlation was high, but the broader point perhaps is that the micro level gains that were shown to be quite large in these experimental studies, they're mostly from Gen AI. That's very easy to compare someone who's using Gen AI, someone who doesn't, and that's where you find these large, clean, well-identified impacts in an experimental setting, which go up to 50% and perhaps even higher more recently. And in the more traditional AI, the non-Gen AI, the kind of field, it's a bit harder to tease out AI's additional effect because it's built on top of existing digital systems and so on. So there it was harder for us to find a clean potential additional effect. Sort of the step up in AI basically is Gen AI, and that's both knowledge intensive services productivity. And in the rest of the economy, probably it's more a gradual increase in the background, success, improving AI models, but not so salient as in the Gen AI. So that's where we see this large step up in the micro gains more easily identified. So that's why we went there. And for Phyllis's point of AI adoption endogenous, so one angle we look at this is the competition among AI producers, which is basically capturing the price and the quality evolution of AI. So a big fear about the AI market now is that it's concentrated in a few players, which might charge strong markups, and that higher cost of AI could hold back adoption. And we compared with previous digital technologies. And we saw this chart where we saw that chips and computer memory, they show the large quality adjusted decline after the introduction of the first technology. And so far we see this with AI as well. So compared to the first wave of ChatGPT, and there was a lot of competitors entering the market, and they helped the price get reduced over time and quality increasing. So we have this quality adjusted AI price index, which shows a 90% decline in the past 2-3 years. So that so far was contributing to a fast increase scenario, and we need to watch the market structure carefully to see if they start to break this rapid decline in quality adjusted prices. Maybe they start to create some market power and charge higher prices.
Peter,
yeah.
sorry.
Yes.
I will interrupt you here because there are already 4 hands up.
Yes. Stop here.
Camilo, why don't you unmute yourself to ask your question? Okay, we cannot hear. Maybe I move to Sophia.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you very well.
Awesome. So I have a set of questions which are actually pretty much 2 big problems. So the first one is informality is at least in Mexico a way to employ yourself in an economic system that doesn't have the capability of employing everyone within formal enterprises, even SMEs. So I think we're a little bit missing the point of how to not let those people that are not being employed within some other firm or somebody else's business to get within the economy, when informality, again, is a way of escaping, unemployment. But since there is no way of escaping unemployment, then you get yourself a job, quote unquote, within informality. So I think this is a topic we need to address at some point, probably not right now, but at some point. So the other thing is there are a lot of rapid changes within the labor market. I think in Latin America, again, at least in Mexico, there are some particularities. Say a lot of people still use a human accountant to present their taxes every year because it's cheaper and easier than use any other internet tool. So if you right now start using AI to do so, you're going to find a lot of people that still were employed within Mexico, but not in some other economies such as the US, because in those
Sophia,
other...
sorry, can you wrap up your question in the next 5 seconds so that we can move?
Okay, yeah, of course.
Sorry about
So
that.
the thing is, yeah, no, that's okay. So the thing is, I believe we are missing a lot of points that are particular to Latin America if we want to just import the mechanism of using AI within some advanced economies. And on the other hand, we have some other topics that need to be addressed at some point as well. One was how to explain informality when there is no business involved, and in the other hand, energy sufficiency and climate impact, since
Thank you.
those
Yeah,
have not
thanks.
been a
Let me
conversation.
move to Rodrigo quickly. Rodrigo, would you like to give a brief answer to Sophia's questions or comments?
Yeah.
Please, yeah.
I tend to agree. I'm not an expert on Mexican labor market, but I can assure you that in every economic context, it's different in the way on how they can adopt AI. So because it's a multifactorial issue. So in that way, it has to do with connectivity, it has to do with digital or previous digital infrastructure, it has to do with talent, it has to do with enthusiasm of the leaderships and of the people and trust over the technology. So there are many factors. But considering all these factors, the evidence show that Gen AI has a significant impact on productivity. So what we see as a common pill for each government is to promote massive upskilling programs such as Astrogonia or other options, because it has shown with evidence that has a huge impact in using AI in an ethical way. So what's behind it? It doesn't matter if today you do have or you don't have a lot of digitalization through accountants. What you know is that doesn't matter if they are using it today or not. If they use it, they will be more productive. So you must promote this usage if you want your economy to get more productive and more competitive. And that has a lot to do with what Peter said. It has a, so if you don't consider that as a service level or production level locally, probably in other places of the world they will consider, and prices will drop, and so importations will become more competitive considering the impact of Gen AI as in the general economy. So I think that's also a matter to worry.
Thanks, Rodrigo. I see some other hands up. You can either put your questions on the chat, because we will be moving in the second part, but we will have another opportunity to have a discussion as a group after the presentation now. So either you can put your questions or wait for the next presentation. So we are very happy to have Stin Borchke now with us, representing our labor, economic employment, labor and social affairs department. And his presentation will also be very complimentary and will cover skills, labor market skills and informality. Stin, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. I have to apologize in advance that we're talking about AI, but unfortunately my internet connection is still not stable enough, so I may occasionally break up a little bit. So I will share some slides with you, which really summarize some of the evidence that we've been gathering over the past few years about the impact of AI on the labor market and on skills. Now, unfortunately, we have relatively little evidence something went wrong here. Okay, here we go. Unfortunately, we have relatively little evidence for Latin America, but I will finish with a slide where I will maybe put forward some thoughts on this, extrapolating from the evidence that we have. So I think the first thing I want to talk about, which we've already mentioned in the previous presentation, is the extraordinary progress that AI has made in recent years. Just to highlight a few of the lines in this particular chart, you have the most left line, which is image classification. There already a while ago, AI exceeded what humans could do in that task. More recently, you have AI exceeding humans in answering PhD level science questions. And, we are also rapidly approaching AI autonomously engineering software. So against this backdrop of rapidly evolving AI capabilities, there is a lot of fear about human jobs. And this fear has been fueled by the CEOs of the foremost AI companies, where we're talking about Sam Altman or Dario Amodei. All of them are Mark Zuckerberg. All of them are predicting important job losses in years to come. Some of them have backtracked more recently, I think, partly in response to the rising backlash that is coming against AI. Although even the piece that Amadei published yesterday, I think, an essay on policies and to respond to AI, he reiterates some of his fears around jobless futures. Now, I've been in the job long enough to know that these fears are not new. Here are the covers of a series of magazines dating back nearly 15 years, and we have seen repeated fears around logical unemployment. And you could go back to the 50s and find similar alarming newspaper articles. And to some extent, this is not very helpful because it causes a lot of fear, and the discussion around the impact on jobs is often not very evidence-based. If you look at employment rates in OECD countries, they are at record highs or near record highs in most OECD countries. So employment has been rising despite automation, because I'm not denying that automation is taking place. It is taking place. But despite automation, employment has been rising. And of course, we have seen a weakening of labor markets in more recent times. But even so, the labor markets are still doing relatively well. Of course, I think there have been some papers, some research that have indicated that something may be happening in the labor market for some groups where hiring or the number of people employed in certain occupations may be declining, and especially for youth. So I think the paper that grabbed the most headlines in this field is the Canaries in the Coal Mine paper by Brynjolfsson and some of his colleagues. And they looked at payroll data for the United States, and they looked at a number of occupations. And in particular, there are some college graduate occupations where AI has made a lot of progress, generative AI. And so, for example, on the left-hand chart here, they look at software developers and employment of software developers over time by age group. And what you can see is that after the introduction of ChatGPT and other generative AI, you see a decline in employment in headcount for younger age groups. And you see the same on the right in customer service, again, an area which theoretically is heavily affected by generative AI. Now, of course, this is not the final word on this. And I think there's been a lot of debate, a lot of criticism of these papers. I believe personally that there's a lot going on in the labor market, and I think this chart shows you. So the left-hand chart shows you the unemployment gap between young people and older workers in Canada, Australia, the EU, and the United States over time. So it's the gap between younger and older workers, the gap in unemployment, and also the on the right you see the same, but for non-college graduates. So on the left you have college graduates, and so people with a college degree, and on the right you don't. And what you see on the left is that the labor market situation for college graduates has been deteriorating for a while. In fact, it's been deteriorating since well before COVID. So again, this is not to deny that AI is not having an impact, but there is clearly a lot else going on in the labor market. And AI may be contributing to what may be a perfect storm for young people. We don't know. But so just to say that a lot else is going on in the labor market. Again, this is not to say that certain groups and certain occupations may not be affected by AI. And here I want to bring in a piece that was recently published by the OECD, which was a cross-organization effort. This is the OECD's own exposure measure of AI at the occupational level. And we built this measure on top using the OECD AI capability indicators. And so what this a lot of information on this slide, but what this shows you is for a number of occupations, it shows you on the left the various capabilities of AI. And what we've done at the OECD, we've measured the human capabilities needed in these occupations. And so then you can calculate the gap between what humans need to be able to do and what AI is able to do. And so where you see the reddish orange colors, that's where the gap between what humans need to be able to do and AI is very narrow. And then you have the green, where actually the gap is still relatively large. So some high skill occupations on the left, in particular in legal, in management, etc. In most capabilities, there's still a large gap between what AI can do and what humans need to be able to do in their jobs. But I just want you to focus very briefly on the right, where you have office and administrative support occupations. And here you see that AI seems at least to have reached the capabilities that most humans will need in that particular job. But even in that case, that is not necessarily a sign that that job will disappear. And I want to show you just in that specific occupation, I want to show you employment over time in the United States since the early 1980s, which this chart shows you. And you can see that this chart shows you a number of things. There's a lot of fluctuation over time in the employment in this particular occupation. But despite this, these fluctuations, if you look at the employment in 2026, it's still higher than it was in the early 80s. There's been a lot of technological changes that has affected this profession: computers, internet, and more recently, AI, of course. But the other thing that is very interesting about this chart is that a lot of the adjustments each time seem to happen at times of economic crisis. And this may be times when companies adopt technologies in a more transformative way because they are really trying to make efficiency savings. And so this is something that we may see with AI going forward as well. Who knows? But this is just a hypothesis. Now, even if at the moment we don't see necessarily a job apocalypse, we do know that jobs themselves are changing. AI is accelerating, automating some of the tasks that humans do. It's creating new tasks for humans to do, or it's just changing the allocation of time that they spend on different tasks. Now, we know a little bit about how that change in work organization is also changing skill needs. And here I present you findings from two surveys that we ran. One survey on the left was a survey on algorithmic management. So these are tools to automate managerial functions, including AI. And this was a survey of mid-level managers. And on the right, I show you the results from a survey that we did of SMEs. And this survey was particularly focused on generative AI. And we asked them about which skills are becoming more important. And one thing that's very interesting is that in both studies, the ability to use, interpret, analyze data was the skill that was identified as the skill becoming most important following the introduction of AI. There are a couple of other skills that are very interesting, such as digital skills, of course, and innovation skills become increasingly important following the adoption of AI. Now, that brings me almost to the end of my presentation, but I just want to highlight, we know that from our research, we know that the lack of skills is a major barrier to AI adoption. That's what firms tell us. I think about 42% of firms in manufacturing and finance tell us this, 50% of SMEs tell us this. And yet, at the same time, we know that AI is changing skill needs, and we know that companies that train their workers to work with AI have much better outcomes than companies that don't train their workers. So in this chart, I show you the impact of AI on performance, the impact of AI on enjoyment as reported by workers. And each time I show you the difference between the workers who say they've received training to work with AI and workers who did not receive training to work with AI. And you can see that the workers who received training are far more positive about the impact of AI on their jobs than workers who did not receive training. And yet there seems to be a training gap because only 42% of workers in manufacturing and finance said that they had received such training. And with SMEs, it's even smaller, with less than a quarter of SMEs that use generative AI say that their employees participated in training related to that use of AI. Now, I think this question of skills is critical. I think the technology to some extent will be available to everybody. It's the skills that countries have to use these technologies and adjust to the changes in the labor market that will be critical to make a success of AI. And this is an area where we know a little bit, but also where there's a lot of unknowns. Now, I said that most of the evidence that I presented here comes from countries other than Latin America. We are, in fact, running new surveys. We're going to be in the field. In fact, in some countries, we may already be in the field this month, and we will collect this data this summer. And these are new OECD surveys of employers and workers on AI. And we have 14 participating countries so far from, across the OECD, from the United States to Europe, also Israel, Australia, and Japan. It is a real shame that we don't have any Latin American countries in here because I feel that we are beginning to see important differences in AI adoption across countries in the way AI is used and differences in regulation and policies across countries. So the impact will also vary across countries. So in this survey, we will collect data from 1,000 workers and 500 employers in each country, except for the US and UK, where the sample sizes will be much larger. And we have questions on worker performance, tasks, skills, training, job quality, worker consultation, etc. And we will start publishing the results of these surveys by the end of this year. Now, just a final slide very quickly with some thoughts on Latin America. So even though I don't have any strong evidence, or I don't have any evidence as part of my work on what will happen in Latin America, here are just a few thoughts. I believe, including Latin America, at least in the short to medium run, other trends may be more important in terms of an impact on the labor market than AI. For example, in some OECD countries, like Korea, you will have half of the working age population disappearing in the next 20 years. So in some countries, we're going to run out of workers much faster than we'll run out of work. There are also a lot of other things going on in the labor market. Changing global trade patterns, for example, uncertainty related to geopolitical issues. I think all of these, for the time being at least, are likely to have a much more significant impact on the labor market than AI. That being said, while AI can also create opportunity, create new jobs, I do wonder whether the economic structure and the occupational and industrial structure of some Latin American countries mean they have a slightly higher risk of automation due to AI. That being said, we all know that AI, and this has been discussed already in the previous session, that AI also offers opportunities to acquire new skills and new expertise and narrow that gap between countries in skills and expertise. And so what we know for sure is that the jobs are going to change and that we'll need to adapt. And finally, some thoughts on informality. Now, I think this is very hard to predict. I think informality could decrease because with AI, the costs of formalization could be lowered. We could also, governments could have better tools in place to enforce these regulations. And we could also see productivity gains for small businesses, which could allow them to formalize. That being said, if there's displacement of formal jobs, we may see an increase in informality. And we also may see with AI an expansion of platform work and informality that way. So these are just a few thoughts, but I will look forward to your questions and the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Justin. So as we are running a bit behind of time, maybe I can ask Guillermo to ask his question, but please be brief. And Sten, if you can be brief also in your answer, I would appreciate it. Guillermo, please go ahead. Guillermo, you can speak up. Okay. If there's any other question, very briefly, we can take at this point. Please unmute yourself and speak up. Otherwise, we will, I think, move to the roundtable, given that we are running behind time. Thank you so much for all the speakers, Peter, Rodrigo, and Sten. And so now we will have the roundtable discussion. So I leave the floor to Aida.
Thank you, Phyllis, and thank you everyone for joining this morning in Latin America. I'm really happy to be joined by Diana Zamora from MasterCard, by Fernando Vargas from the Inter-American Development Bank, and Rodrigo Creel from Chile's National Evaluation and Productivity Commission. And I think this is going to be a really interesting roundtable and will really complement very well the presentations that we've had so far, which I would just like to summarize in a few words what I've heard so far. First, it's clear that AI can really generate significant productivity gains that we heard from Peter's presentation. But we've also heard that those gains are unlikely to materialize automatically because we've seen adoption is uneven. And in the case of Latin America, we see that actually most countries are at the bottom of the adoption scale. And then we heard from Steen, also from Rodrigo, that skills and managerial capabilities are really critical. And to translate AI into productivity gains. So I would like to turn to our panel, and I would like to start first with Diana. And Diana, you are really in a privileged position because at MasterCard you are working with companies that want to adopt AI and around the world, but also in the region. And my question to you is, in Latin America, where do you see the biggest obstacle for adopting AI? And do you see any promising pilots across the region?
So I wanted to thank you very much. It's a privilege to join you today. I wanted to share some things that we're seeing on the ground in real time that connects with many things that we have heard, particularly on informality, data, and thinking that AI is powered by data. And the better the data, the better the results, and the better diffusion that we will have, particularly in Latin America. And I want to give you some silver lining that we're observing again on the ground. We have seen that productivity gains can be shared via digitalization, gainings for workers in terms of social protection, gainings for the government itself, increasing tax revenues, gainings for firms because they have access to credit. But particularly in payments, we are seeing a new phenomenon that I would love. I'm trying to coin a term that is digital informality. Basically, what we had assumed is that you digitize a payment, you create a digital trail, and in some ways, if you are a merchant, if you're a small merchant, you create this informational collateral, right? So you know you can go to a bank and tell them, I'm already this amount of transactions, I sell this amount of whatever, and I can access credit. However, the way we digitize payments truly matters, because what is happening right now is that this workflow and this axiom of we digitize the transaction and then we all see these gains is being disrupted because some new payment platforms and some new ways of payment have started to be person to person. And what I'm describing, where we see all the gains, are usually person to merchants, right? So if we go to have a dinner and Aida, you paid the bill, and then we split. When you pay the bill, that is a P2M transaction that triggers many ways. As I mentioned, the restaurant will have a paper trail. The tax authority will increase their revenue because it will be taxed. And they will likely have this diffusion effect for hiring more workers, because if you grow, you may be able to increase your productivity and also hire more workers. The next transaction, when I pay that half into your account, that is a P2P transaction. The core of this digital informality is being able to differentiate these two types of transactions. What is a payment and what is a P2P, right? I shouldn't be paying any tax for sending you money after we split that bill. There should not be any kind of nuisance in that. However, as we're advancing in digitizing many transactions, and please believe me, I am Mexican. I love seeing how other countries are digitizing their payments, and I'm very sad that in so many, basically the measures of how many cash is used in Mexico, it's around 80% of the transactions today in Mexico are usually in cash, and that in Brazil is lesser, in Costa Rica is lesser. So this is very good. But in terms of AI, this is extremely important. What kind of tools are we going to use? What kind of triggers are we going to allow? And today, I'm posing questions in terms of how can we use this information to design policies that allow us to extract the most value of AI? Because if we think that most of these transactions are going to look like P2P, then what are those diffusion channels? And with AI, so let's say you could have fiscal trades or underwriting for some credit. These portion of the economy that today is informal now will be digitally informal. So a couple of things, and I will be short on this. What we're seeing is that there is a shade of nothing is white and black. But maybe we can talk about the ladder of formality. Of course, if you're a one-person business and you're selling coconuts in the beach, you may want to avoid paying some taxes. What are the returns? What are the costs? We really need to have a conversation about, if we want to attain and we want to reap the effects of AI that come from data, how do we make sure that data is feeding the system, which has fed the system back in the day, or at least in the previous rails, particularly in cards, what tweaks do we need, particularly in tax policy, in supporting MSMEs, and what kind of flexible social protections do we need? I will end saying that there has been, I've been looking into some spaces in Africa where they have tried to tax some digital transactions, so making the differentiation between P2P and P2M, and they have seen people coming back to cash. So it's a very delicate balance. I will leave it there. I don't have answers. I only have questions.
Thanks a lot, Diana. And I will turn now to Fernando. I think your point of view will be very interesting because we know that the Inter-American Development Bank is working directly with governments and businesses across the region, helping companies in technology in general, but also in AI. And if we've been discussing so far that domestic adoption is really key. And I would like to hear from you, where are the biggest bottlenecks? We heard from Stina and from Rodrigo before that skills and managerial capabilities seem to be very important, but we also hear the point of data from Diana. So infrastructure comes to mind, but there's also the point of access to finance. So there are many barriers that we often think about in the region. What does the IDB see on the ground? Thanks.
Thank you, Aida. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation as well. Yeah, I would say that the worst part of the story is that we don't have only those restrictions and obstacles, but that those obstacles compounds. So you cannot solve just one of them and then expect to adoption to be unleashed. By actually, you need, let's say, a package to solve or to address those bottlenecks and allow for companies and SMEs in particular to get the most out of the technology. So I'm very interested on what happened in different business functions, I would say. I think we're seeing we had a very recent, well, recent in AI terms is a difficult term, but a survey we conducted in December last year on manufacturing SMEs in Argentina on the status of AI adoption, and even considering that this is a very specific group of SMEs. They were showing that, of course, adoption is mostly on Gen AI tools, and mostly for, let's say, back office support, for support operations, like for marketing, for paperwork, or used to be paperwork, that kind of office support for firms, and that gives them, let's say, the task productivity gains. Way less is being applied into other business functions that can have a more direct impact on productivity, like business functions like logistics and delivery services, or using data for making better production decisions. That is something that is being integrated somehow in some SMEs, still not massive. And the most important part, I would say, and where the most important obstacle I believe it needs to be addressed, is on innovation. We have SMEs lag behind not only in domestic terms against innovation in larger firms, but against SMEs from other countries. And one of the problems, or several problems that SMEs have for innovating, whether it's be adopting foreign superior technologies or incorporating certain tools into the company, is the lack of knowledge, the lack of, this support, somebody that can tell me what is the right technology that I need to use in my environment for increase my productivity. But maybe even more important, what is the type of new product that I should be working on in order to have a larger increase in productivity? And AI, as we kind of know from what is happening, at least in science, it's helping to develop, faster, better, and more ideas for, having the success when you use these tools to decide what to do on innovation. So the bottleneck, the problem is that the bottleneck moves further into the chain of innovating. Let's say The problem would be not now if SMEs can have the ideas that can, later translate it to increased sales or productivity, but how they can even test those ideas if they're going to be working into the market, how they're going to be able to develop at least a minimal viable product that can give you information on how that idea, the new products, going to be working in your market. And then you have the testing facility, let's say, bottleneck. So it won't be data necessarily, it won't be the organizational part, it won't be managerial, but also the hard part of the infrastructure that you need, a lab, a metrology lab, all the institutions that provide specific machinery and equipment, let's say, that you need to advance further in product innovation, particularly. So, and that requires then something that it cannot be solved within each SMEs, because it doesn't make sense for each SMEs to have their own lab. So that requires the innovation system around it. And that, recall all what I've been discussing before about innovation systems and innovation policies. So the compounding effect of all the obstacles on innovation will have also this environmental, let's say, constraint around it, that it needs to be solved as well in order to unleash the innovation capacity in firms. And we know it's going to be an obstacle because we perform another study with a particular type of SMEs, which are like startups, let's say non-AI startups, and how they are dealing with AI. And they are, yes, using it for the business support functions. They are using it for predicting, but they are also more into using it for R&D and innovation. But the obstacle that they report, at least, are related to how useful are the tools to really advance on innovation, and what the scale of the other things that you need in your environment to transform your candidate ideas into new products that you can really put into the market. So at least, again, as we're living now the AI world, we have some early, I wouldn't call it evidence, but at least we're starting to see that what AI is doing, and it's reminding us that we had certain innovation shortcomings in our countries that are going to become more urgent now that the potential gains are even larger than before. So I would say it's a call to action for the comprehensive innovation policy that can help us support firms, whether within their own operations and on the environment that support innovation in firms in general.
Thanks a lot for bringing that additional dimension to the discussion. And I'll now turn to Rodrigo. And Rodrigo, at the Productivity Commission in Chile, but also in other productivity commissions around the OECD, you spend a lot of time thinking about what can be done to help technology diffuse, so it can, the gains for productivity can be wider. And in Peter, in his presentation, he suggested that countries that fail to adopt AI quickly, so those that miss the train now, they risk losing competitiveness and also market share, and basically staying at the bottom, as we were seeing the Latin American countries. So what do you think can governments or policymakers do today to help diffuse that technology and avoid losing that kind of train?
Hello, Aida. Good afternoon, everyone, my co-panelists too. Thanks for the question. I think this issue is better approached structurally, not programmatically. I believe we should avoid the framing of what programs are needed, because that can lead us in some wrong directions. In particular, the proliferation of many support programs, of which we already have many. In the Productivity Commission's work on productive linkages in Chile, we've spent some time trying to understand why SME productivity remains so low despite a fairly dense ecosystem of support instruments. The diagnosis we keep arriving at is the bottleneck isn't really access to credit, although it's mentioned in surveys frequently, but or even the affordability of technological improvements for SMEs, for firms that are lagging somehow. It's more whether these ordinary firms sit, where these ordinary firms sit in the value chain. Chilean SMEs sell overwhelmingly to final consumers. They're at the end of the chain and not embedded within it. And that position limits their exposure to technical standards, their incentives to innovate. And this I fully agree with Fernando's point. Crucially, the external pressure that forces them to change. So I think AI adoption faces exactly the same structural problem. The question is more whether, not whether firms can access the AI tools, because increasingly they can, and often at very low cost. The question is more whether they have a credible reason to invest in the management, to invest their management attention, their mental bandwidth, the organizational disruption, the learning cost that this adoption really requires. So for most ordinary firms in Latin America right now, the honest answer is no, but not because they don't want it or because they oppose it. It's because I think their competitive environment doesn't demand it, and innovation in so many cases, you need urgency, you need a demand for it. So I would point to three things that would need to change. Okay, first, the anchor firms, big firms, large firms, need to pull AI adoption through their supply chains, not just use it internally. So when a frontier firm adopts AI and raises its own performance, that only diffuses to ordinary firms if the frontier firm requires it of its suppliers. The evidence from manufacturing in Germany's Mittelstand, from mining supply chains in Australia, is that diffusion happens through the procurement pressure in so many cases, and not through support programs in particular. So the equivalent for AI would be large firms making explicit and wherever possible contractual that they expect AI-capable suppliers, and this changes the investment calculus for ordinary firms in ways that programs usually can't. Second, I think we need to change the policy approach towards more territorial intermediaries, not national programs. The evidence also shows that countries that have been most successful at technology diffusion to SMEs share this feature that a neutral technical actor close to the ground, close enough to know which firms in a given region are ready, which need a year of capability building, and how to connect them to the frontier firms in their sector. That makes a difference. National programs reach firms already motivated enough to seek them out, and so they're not that effective. And third, just not to take too much time, and this is the hardest, ordinary firms need to pivot away from B2B, towards B2B. A firm selling directly to final consumers is insulated from performance pressures that drive adoption, and of course this is the more the harder part. But to summarize, I think we need these three points: anchor firms to demand it, and territorial intermediaries to enable it, and then supply chain integration to make it compelling.
Thank you. That was a very, very complete answer and very relevant for the region. I would love to continue this discussion with this panel, but at the same time we are running behind, and we want to be conscious and respectful of everybody's time, and I'm sure that we will be able to continue the discussion in the future. So I would like to pass on the word to Åsa Johansson, our director in the policy research branch, to conclude the workshop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aida, and thank you to all participants in this really fantastic discussion. And I from my side, I really enjoyed bringing in the Latin America perspective, because a lot of discussions we have had at the OECD focus a lot on more core OECD countries that it's not simply because of data availability. We tend to focus on G7 and in this area. So really nice discussion. So thank you to all the participants and all the speakers and everyone online. So a few takeaways from my side today. I think one of the things that I take from this conversation, and I'm picking up what Ida already said, that AI is advancing very rapidly, and it has the great potential to transform production of firms and businesses, as we heard from many of you. It can boost growth, and it can also reshape labor markets. So there can be a lot of positive aspects out of AI. But we also heard from a lot of the discussion today that AI can also pose challenges for firms to adopt the technology, for workers to adapt to using it because they don't have the right skills, or firms are not organized in the right way. And all of this requires good policy design and support. So turning to some of the things around productivity, we heard from the speakers that there is indeed a wide variation across countries in terms of about the expected gains based on the data that we have at hand today. And from that, from Peter's presentation, we saw that as it looks like now, the potential gains in Latin America tend to be on the lower end of the available estimates. And my understanding what that reflects factors around the economic structure of Latin American economies, that they're maybe more into more manufacturing and mining rather than high-skilled technologies, which are, as far as we see now, the ones that are more likely to be exposed to AI. It also comes down to how fast you can diffuse and adopt AI. And that is another important aspect that we need to understand better. And Stein was talking about that, trying to get a better handle on this, and Peter as well. And I would also like to pick up on some of the things we heard from Rodrigo as well, and Peter on the importance of spillovers, international spillovers, as a way of diffusion of AI, because this can be a supply chain, puts pressures on firms to make more use of this. So that is an aspect that we need to understand better as well. And I think that's a good point, that we have this international dimension as well. One thing that I also thought was important that came out of this discussion is that Latin American economies, you have informality, and informality tend to be fairly high, and how that is linking in with AI. That is something that I think some pointed to, that could have a positive effect of reducing in informality, but it could also be that a high degree of informality may make it more difficult to adopt and make use of AI. So I think that there is an interesting question to investigate more. And that brings me also to the question of labor markets. What do we know about the impact of AI on labor markets? There's a lot of discussion on whether AI is going to automate or fully or partly automate some type of task, or will it lead to changes in tasks? For example, will AI allow for new productivity enhanced tools that can help workers become more productive? Can it lead to completely new tasks? And I honestly do think that there is a lot more work we need to do in this area on the labor markets to understand what AI means, because we're very early in the days of AI, and AI is also likely to change. We would have Gen AI, we had this robotics, and many different things, and all of this can play out differently across the different types of sectors and skill groups. And that brings me to one thing that there was some mention on the entry levels for youth and employment opportunities for them. Are they going to be more exposed than others? And here I would just like to draw your attention to some of the work that we've done recently in the economics department on the link between AI and aging. We look at the exposure of AI across age cohorts. And in this preliminary work that we've been doing, the evidence we tend to find is that the exposure to automation is higher in younger ages, and they decline with age. So there is maybe something to look into more. Is it the case that the youth can be more exposed to AI than other age group? And this also resonates a lot with what we heard from the presentations on what policies are doing on the example of the HASLO, where they actually are talking about tailored and personal courses to make sure that the individuals can benefit from AI. And that is I think that will become more increasingly important. You have this specific context of training that is adapted to the specific conditions that firms are seeing and workers are seeing, and also not forgetting the importance of managerial capabilities in order to make the most of AI. So I think that this has been a fascinating conversation. I learned a lot, and I learned quite a lot from what happens in Latin America. So thank you all again, and I look forward to continue this conversation with you all. Thank you so much, and have a great weekend.